I founded and organized the Women's March in St. Petersburg, Florida, for which I got the ACLU Civil Liberties Award. And during that time, I happened to be on television. Well, I mean, I had a team and they sent me to be on television, which apparently was an important television station. But since I don't want TV, I didn't know. So a few days later, I'm in the swimming pool at my condominium, and there's a man there by the name of Claire, who, is often there, and we talk a little bit. And he said to me, "Oh, I saw you on television. You're smarter than I thought you were. Your hair looked nice, but you probably didn't like it because they said how old you were."
Wow.
So he hit every single one of the things that people tag us with and dismiss us with. Yeah. Of course, we can't be too smart. I mean, so when I was first reviewed, my first show at the wherever it was in Stony Creek, Connecticut, got reviewed in the New Haven Register, and the guy said, "She must have been inspired." I mean, not thinking I had any connection to art history, which is, of course, another thing. How do we place a woman artist in an art history that's, in which all the featured people are men? I mean, if I'm telling stories with masks, I'm going back to prehistory. Mm-hmm. But I'm also moved. I always was so moved by the Bread and Puppet Theater.
Yeah.
And it ended up that I met those people when I was in Germany doing a series of masks on the Holocaust. I mean, you had asked, what inspires.
Right.
I think it goes from one thing to another. I mean, as I said, it began with being in awe of life, of being overcome by the beauty, the magic of it, and wanting to hold on to it and wanting to share it. That I think that's just the human. That's what we are as people. We want to build community. We want to be together. But when I went through, I guess what we could call the shadow time, mm-hmm. not understanding, especially when I got married, how I would be so easily dismissed and not seen. Mm-hmm. So when my daughter Janet was born and Betty Friedan's The Feminist Mystique came about, for which I was eternally grateful, I hadn't understood that she was going to form the movement. But once, as I had mentioned, she was on the cover of the New York Times book review section with the other women that she had founded now with, some of whom I've gotten to know well. I wrote to the New York Times and got a letter back on Now Stationery. I don't think it was written by Betty, giving me the contact information for 8 other women who were already members of Now. And I immediately contacted them. They were older, very accomplished, and very self-satisfied. They had no desire to organize. But you see, I hadn't reached the level of accomplishment I was seeking. And I was looking for community, and I wanted to change the world. When you're young, you think you can do it. And the thing is that we did do it. Even if we are backtracked, we did it, and you can't kill an idea. Once an idea is out, you can't kill it.
Can I ask you, I wanted to go back for a moment, especially to speak to a younger generation who may happen upon, this interview or your work, and maybe they are or might find themselves in a situation you were in while you were married, and the feminine mystique comes out, Betty Friedan's work. What happened in that moment for you? I mean, just with the work, like what changed, how was it touching you?
It's instantaneous. Mm-hmm. In my childhood, people used to come to dinner And in those days, nobody stopped speaking when a child tried to speak. So we were listeners. And people came to dinner who had been involved in the labor movement. People came to dinner who were socialists. People came to dinner who had obviously had fled the Nazis. And I wanted a cause. I wondered what cause would I be able to devote myself to, because these people had a sense of self and conviction and comfort that wasn't really common in the world that I was growing up in. I think those people, and also to get back to the Times, the pictures of the writers on the book review section who carried themselves, who had an assurance or a seriousness that attracted me as well. So it was, but I had been prepared and ready for the women's movement. Because when I moved, soon after I moved here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, I met a woman, Susan File, who had recently moved to the area and was lonely. And we started to talk, and she organized a group of women, and we met regularly. So that was before consciousness raising. And so I already saw that the personal is political, that it's not just me. Yeah. And then the other person that had a powerful impact, who became my best friend at the time, was Kay Kelly. Kay Kelly had moved to New Canaan. She was new in Connecticut. She was introduced to me by a woman who lived above my former husband was a psychiatrist, and this woman lived above his office, and she invited me and Kay to meet. Kay wanted to get a divorce from an abusive husband, but she had only been in Connecticut months, and the divorce laws were so ancient and retrograde and cruel to women. She had to have known at least two people for 2 years who could come to court for her.
Wow.
So she and I decided there was something very wrong, which of course we knew, but together, when you have a friend who is connecting just as we are. So I started to read. And Ridgefield, Connecticut, Alice Paul lived in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Alice Paul, who, wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, co-founded the Equal Rights Amendment. There were first wave feminists who had lived in Ridgefield. Ridgefield was a town, an early, pre-revolutionary town that in the 19th century, a railroad had been built that landed right in Main Street. The railroad was built by mostly Italian and some Irish immigrants, many of whom decided to stay in Ridgefield and became the plumbers and the carpenters. And with the railroad, wealthy New Yorkers came and built big houses. And in those wealthy New Yorkers, there were feminists. And so the Ridgefield Library had a lot of books, including a 2-volume biography of Susan B. Anthony that I used when Jackie Ceballos had me make a 5-foot Susan B. Anthony sculpture. Wow. That's now in Susan B. Anthony house. I read and read and read, and I also wrote to the Women's Department of Labor, which no longer exists, unfortunately. And I said, send me everything. And they sent me pamphlets that went up to the arm of my chair. I read every single one. So I knew every law that was discriminatory of women. So when Ella Grasso, who was, I believe, a senator at the time, became governor, put together a panel. They called me to speak at Hartford. I brought a 3x5 card in which I had written every single law on the books in Connecticut. I shocked them. But to Connecticut's credit, within a year, those laws were repealed.
All right. Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah. But it wasn't enough for me, you know,
Yeah.
to be a political activist, because I'm an artist.
Right.
And, you know, giving those talks, I realized that I had to put my art in it. So one day